How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and this is my channel PSReady that's all about PlayStation. Thanks so much to everyone who followed the official PSReady Twitter account over the weekend. I think it went up like 300 or 400 people, which is absolutely insane. I'm trying to think up some good stuff to post over there, but in the meantime, if you haven't checked it out, go over to Stay PSReady on Twitter. I'm rocking my good friend Zach, aka CZ's World's merch today. He sent it over to me. It's like his new metal band inspired logo. Go check out his channel if you haven't. I'm sure you have if you're into horror movies, because he's got like 1.5 million subs or something. But yeah, it's like the lamest shout out ever. Today I've got three great topics as usual. The first one is really interesting because Sony released another small PS5 update that added a feature in that's honestly very good for logging into your PS5 and not having your account hacked, which is important because apparently the security on the PlayStation Network is nothing. The second topic is all about the PS5 Pro and some new updates there. And then finally, we're going to go into the PS Plus Extra and Premium games for the month. There's one premium classic game I really want to highlight. Let's start out with the first topic, which is this new update for your PlayStation 5 that's going to make it way more secure. And honestly, this is something that I think everyone should do. Sony released a small update last week in all the craziness of the Xbox news where Pentiment and all these other games are coming over to PlayStation. There was a ton of other news surrounding the PS5 Pro. So this kind of got lost in the shuffle, but basically they've given you the ability to log into your PlayStation 5 using the mobile app as a sort of passkey. So to activate this, you're going to go to settings on your PS5's home screen. Then you're going to go to users and accounts and select security, and then choose sign in with Passkey. And then once you're there, you scan the QR code with your phone, and then it'll ask you to sign into your PlayStation Network account. And once you're there, you can click create passkey. And the cool thing is you can actually set it up so that your screen locking on your phone or unlocking will unlock your PlayStation 5. So when you turn on your PlayStation 5 going forward, you'll just have to open your phone screen, and then your PS5 will know that it's you trying to log in, and it'll allow you to get into your PS5. I think honestly everyone should do this with their PlayStation because I know everyone out there, it's like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, knows of someone who got hacked and lost access to their PlayStation account or had to go through this terrible process of getting things refunded on the PlayStation Store, which is terrible because they don't do refunds on the PlayStation Store. My best friend George had this happen to him a couple of years ago where someone from like Saudi Arabia or whatever was able to get access to his account. They bought a ton of Fortnite V-Bucks after logging into their Fortnite account, and they added all of that money to their account, but it all came from my friend George's credit card, which was saved to his PlayStation 5, which I'm assuming if you have a PlayStation 5, everything like your credit card or your PayPal or anything you use to pay for stuff on the store is saved to your account. So what he had to do is contact Sony, prove that it wasn't him by showing that it wasn't his email associated with the Fortnite account, and then they said, okay, I guess that might be you, but then he had to send in his driver's license and all this extra stuff. And if you've never tried to get into contact with Sony before, it's not exactly the easiest process at all. It's like a whole thing where you have to talk to them on the phone or talk to them on a chat bot. Sometimes you get someone who knows what's going on. Most times you don't. Now, if you don't use PlayStation Stars, you're actually placed in a worse queue than the people who are leveled up on PlayStation Stars. They actually get priority access with customer support chat. And regardless, it's not a process that I feel like anyone wants to be doing. So I have this set up on my Steam Deck as well. Basically, if I want to log into Steam on any device like a web browser, a phone, a computer, or even another Steam Deck, all I have to do is just scan a QR code with my phone and then it logs me in. It's pretty damn secure, and I like it a lot more than the tried and true method of having all of those Google passcodes saved in Authenticator. I know that's the most secure way to do it, but like every time you get a new phone, you have to remember to export it, and then it adds them on a giant list. So I've gone through like 4 phones since I set up 2-factor on all of my accounts, and now I have this massive list where they're all different codes. So logging into these different accounts means I have to punch in like 5 different codes. I activated this passcode thing immediately because it just eliminates so many steps, and it's secure enough where like I don't think anyone's going to hack into my Apple account and steal my iPhone data and then have the PlayStation app set up where they can use their iPhone's pass screen to then log into a PlayStation 5. Like my PS5 is set up as my primary as well, and making that change is extremely difficult. So if you don't have this set up, long story short, you should go into your settings, you should set it up immediately because it's simple, right? It's not going to add that much time to logging into your PS5. PS5, which is great. But yeah, for a later video this week, someone asked in the comments on a previous video if I saw the issue where people are getting locked out of their games. And from what I've been able to figure out by researching it, it has to do with your account getting hacked, and getting that stuff back and unlocked is apparently very hard. So I'm going to look into that process for you guys and have that be an anchor topic in a later video. But until then, make sure you have this new way to sign into your PS5 setup. It's going to give you peace of mind going into the future. The next topic is all about the PlayStation 5 Pro. So this news story is coming from my friends over at Sacred Symbols. One of my best friends, Dustin Furman, is a host over there, and he's the producer for the entire network. One of the topics on the Sacred Symbols podcast last week came from Colin Moriarty, the host over there, and he was talking about how third-party developers, while they might not have the actual dev kits for the PS5 Pro, what they have been given by Sony is a full spec sheet as like a benchmark of what they should be working towards in terms of releasing games towards the end of the year. So if developers are already working on a game that's coming out later this year, they'll have a spec in mind that they can also have a PS5 Pro mode ready to go so that those games will run better. And I'd assume that that applies to people like Capcom who are working on Dragon's Dogma 2. The big rumor there was that the game was going to run at 30 FPS at launch. They confirmed it's going to have an unlocked frame rate, which like, I don't like that. I think they should have a quality mode that's locked at a hard 30 FPS at a higher resolution, and then have an unlocked mode and call it performance, and then people can use that. But like, even with a VRR TV, that'll help you from like 48 FPS to 60. But if a game has an unlocked frame rate, that means it's running anywhere from like 30 to 60 FPS. So even with a VRR TV, you're still going to see some artifacting and screen tearing, and you're going to notice those frame drops and stutters. But regardless, third-party developers have a spec sheet, which is good for people like me who are very interested in what the spec is going to be for the PlayStation 5, because once third-party developers have it, that's when you really start to see the floodgates open up in terms of leaks and rumors. This actually happened quite a bit with the regular PS5. Once third-party developers started getting dev kits for that console, they just started posting them on Twitter. Before that, we were looking at like screenshots of Kojima videos where he was in his studio, and in the background of a video, there was this weird horizontal PC that had a V shape on top of it, and everyone sort of guessed that that was the PS5 dev kit. And then just a couple of months later, a third-party developer who had the dev kit in hand straight up tweeted out a picture of it, and it turned out to be true that that was the PS5 dev kit. So if they have a spec sheet, that means we could see the official specs a lot sooner rather than later, but those seem to have already leaked, and I'm really curious to see if they are confirmed. The YouTuber who's leaked all of the specs of the PlayStation 5 is Moore's Law is Dead. He is pretty spot on with his leaks, and most of it comes from just general hardware knowledge, but also rumors that he's heard from inside Sony. And what he said is that it's basically going to be double the performance of the regular PS5, and that the target is going to be 4K 120 FPS. Now, as someone who games a lot on PC, who has a PC with a 4090, 32 gigs of RAM, and an i9 13500K, I don't think this $600 or so hardware is going to get anywhere near an actual 4K 120 FPS benchmark. I think they'll be able to do it though, because what we've heard is they're going to have their own AI upscaling. If you don't know what that is, basically Nvidia and AMD have their own version of it, DLSS and FSR 3.0. Each of them are on 3.0 version. And basically what they do on the DLSS side is it uses AI to create a frame to insert between frames. So if you're playing at 60 FPS, it bumps it all the way up to 120, and it's pretty good, right? Like, I don't use it all that much because games on PC have been so broken lately that like getting 60 FPS as the benchmark is apparently very hard. Like, even on my 4090 PC, playing Starfield at launch, I could not get anywhere near 60 FPS. So even with DLSS 3, I was getting like 80, and it looked like pure dog. FSR 3 is like fine. It's not as good. I think it also uses AI, but the reason people like FSR 3 is because whether you have an AMD card or an Nvidia card, you can take advantage of it. Whereas with DLSS, you need a 40 series Nvidia card. But the silver lining here is that Sony apparently has made their own version of this that they're going to implement on the PS5 Pro. And that gets me excited, mainly because of how good the upscaling was on the PS4 Pro. It wasn't to this level, obviously. Like, there was probably no AI involved. They actually used checkerboard rendering to run the game internally at like 1080p or 1440p, and then they'd upscale it to 4K. And while yes, it didn't look as good as true 4K, it got close enough with games like Horizon, Zero Dawn, and Days Gone, and all the other ones, where having a PS4 Pro for me at the time was very essential because of that upscaling tech. I think the reason they're going to be marketing it as 4K 120 is because they really shot themselves in the foot with the regular PlayStation 5. They knew for a long time that a lot of the games we were going to see in the early gen were just going to be be cross-gen ports, so they could advertise that console as 4K 60. And for the first few years, I mean, they hit it pretty regularly, mainly because we were either playing ports of PS4 games from them or just fully on developed PS4 games that were just brought up to PS5 and cross-released. So when you're targeting hardware that's like 10 or 12 years old at the time, it's easy to use modern day hardware like the PlayStation 5 and get it to run at higher resolutions and a locked 60 FPS. Now we have games that are taking advantage of the PlayStation 5 like Rebirth, Final Fantasy 16, Jedi Survivor, Dead Space, The Lords of the Fallen, even Elden Ring to some extent, and a lot of those games aren't really hitting that 60 FPS benchmark all that well. Like, they do come with performance modes, but those performance modes are like anywhere from 40 to 60 FPS, and it's just largely not a great experience. But if they didn't market the original PlayStation 5 as a 60 FPS machine, I think that's what they would have marketed the PS5 Pro as, and that's what I'm really excited about. I think the PS5 Pro, with it being 2 times as powerful as the current PlayStation 5 on paper, while that's not going to help them hit an actual true 4K 120, I think it will help them hit an actual like 1440p 60, or maybe in some cases a 1080p 60 benchmark. But still, having a locked 60 FPS in games makes the PS5 Pro basically essential for me, right? Like, I'm getting very sick of the PC port situation where every game comes out, it runs like crap. Even a new Sony release like Pacific Drive is just absolutely abysmal on both the PS5 and the PC. Like, I refunded that game within an hour or two of playing it. Well, I did like it at launch and I thought the gameplay was good. That game is regularly dropping into the 40 FPS range. It's using like 80% of my GPU power and capping out at like 5% of my CPU power, which for a game that looks like this game does should not be the case, especially since it's single player first person and the graphics are low poly as hell. And on PS5, you can go look up gameplay of this game and it looks awful. Like, it's low res, the shadows don't look good, there's blocky textures, there's pop-in, there's streaming issues, the frame rate is anywhere from like 20 to 30 FPS. It's just not a good experience across the board. But the point is, I'm getting really frustrated with releases like that. But if we're going to get hardware that can kind of brute force its way past those limitations, that's a day one buy for me, no question asked at all. And with all of the big games of this generation seemingly coming out with the PS5 Pro, like Grand Theft Auto 6, whatever Naughty Dog is working on, whatever Sucker Punch has been working on, whatever Ben Studio's been working on, some updates for Gran Turismo 7, maybe something new from Guerrilla Games, we have Concord and Fair games coming out, like all of the big first party stuff, and GTA 6 seems to be aligning with this PS5 Pro releasing. So like, if you want to get the best experience possible with GTA 6, I think getting a PS5 Pro is going to be a very enticing thing for a lot of people. I think GTA 6 is going to be one of those games that does not run at 60 FPS. I think 30 FPS is going to be the target across the board. I mean, even if you go back to the launch of GTA 5, that was like a 20 FPS experience on PS3 and Xbox 360. They were able to kind of smooth it out for the PS4 launch, and then the PS4 Pro, I think, might have gotten a 60 FPS update. I'm not sure if that game ever did, but Red Dead Redemption 2 is another example of that game came out around the same time as the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, and that still is locked to 30 FPS on consoles. Even on the PS5 and Xbox Series X, you're still playing it at 30. So knowing that, I think you're just going to get the best experience, like a locked 30 at a higher resolution and higher settings if you have a PS5 Pro ready to go. And if you're on a regular PS5 or Xbox Series X original, I feel like you're going to run into some issues there. Regardless, whether or not it's too early for a PS5 Pro, which I kind of think it is, just mainly because of how few PS5 games have come out, I think the timing is right because of all these true next-gen games that are coming. They're clearly moving into the next generation with this half step, and then Xbox is going to release the next Xbox, and then Sony will be able to follow it up in 2027 or 2028 with the PS6, and then they'll be ready to go for that. But yeah, I was excited to have a story from Sacred Symbols because I listen every week. I mean, Dustin's one of my best friends, and we've been playing with Brad, their new host over there on Helldivers 2 pretty much every night, and he's awesome as well. If you haven't checked out his new podcast, Summon Sign, it's excellent. They basically have people from the industry on. Right now, it's mostly people from Last Stand, and it's just deep dives into what people are playing. They've had Gene Park on, they've had people like Lord Cognito from the Iron Lords on, Mr. Matty Plays has been on as well. It's a great podcast if you haven't checked it out. Anyway, that brings us to the third story of today's video, which is the new updates around PS Plus Extra and Premium. There's a lot of games. I think there's over 13 games that are added to both libraries, but I just kind of pared it down to the games that I think are worth playing. I hope you understand. So on Extra, you're getting a really good list of PS5 games this month, starting with Need for Speed Unbound, then the Outer Worlds Spacer Choice Edition, Tales of Arise, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and Lego World. Out of all those games, I think Need for Speed Unbound is the one to try. The only thing I would recommend is just turning off the in-game soundtrack and playing your own music. The soundtrack is just terrible in that game. I think it's like one of the worst Need for Speed soundtracks ever, which sucks because Need for Speed growing up always had the best soundtracks. Like that's where I really developed my music taste. I think that game is kind of underrated, honestly. The cell shaded art style, I could take or leave it. I don't really care about it, but the actual driving is cool. And the map being like their version of Chicago set in the fall, I always thought was awesome. And the story setup is like built in weeks where you're building up every week to a new race at the end of it. That's like a tournament where you usually win a lot of money and a new car. It's kind of got this Dark Souls element where you have to be smart about banking your money or else you get arrested and then you lose it all. So you need to have enough to buy into the qualifier at the end of the week. It's a great story setup. Tales of Arise, I've heard nothing but good things about. Spacer's Choice Edition of the Outer Worlds, I heard was kind of janky, but maybe they fixed it by now. And then finally Lego Worlds, I added on there just because it's a really cool, like underrated Minecraft version of a Lego game that I don't think a lot of people have tried out. And then on the premium library under the classics listing, you're getting a PSP game that is bar none my favorite of the PSP games that I played growing up. It's called Resistance Retribution. It took the Resistance games, made a new story with a new character who wears an awesome leather jacket, but the cool thing about it was it took it from a first-person shooter and made it into a third-person shooter. So on the PSP, it kind of was jank where it had auto lock because, you know, you didn't have two thumbsticks, but on the PlayStation Vita, I played it back in the day and you were able to map the face buttons to the actual right joystick and it worked like a regular third-person shooter and it was awesome. And now obviously since you have two joysticks on the DualSense, you can do the same thing. The upscaling I've heard looks pretty good in PSP games. Obviously blowing up a game that was made for a 3-inch screen onto a giant TV isn't going to look as amazing as like a PS5 game, but if you've never played this Resistance game, I highly recommend giving it a shot because as far as original stories in that universe goes, it's one of my favorites and it takes place in London, which is awesome. So yeah, that about covers it for today's PS5 update. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.